My parents gave my brother $230K for a house and called me a failure, so I stopped calling. 2 years later, he drove past my property and called Dad screaming, "You need..." My name is Candace, and I turned 32 last month. 2 years ago, I sat at my parents' dinner table and watched as they handed my brother, Ethan, a check for $230,000 for his new house. That same evening, I overheard my father say to my mother, "At least one of our children isn't a failure." I left, deleted their contacts, and stopped calling. 2 years of silence passed, until last week when my brother drove past my new 40-acre property and immediately called our father, shouting, "You have to see what Candace has built. Let me know what you think," and hit the like and subscribe buttons before I reveal how I secretly built my success, while my family thought I was wasting my potential. Growing up in Maplewood, an affluent suburb north of Chicago, our family looked perfect on the outside. Our 2-story colonial home with a manicured lawn and 3-car garage embodied everything my parents valued: status, appearance, and financial success. My father, Robert Miller, built his career as an investment banker, working 60 hours a week and measuring his worth by the size of his annual bonuses. My mother, Susan, embraced her role as a classic socialite, organizing charity balls and luncheons at country clubs, carefully maintaining our family's image in society. From my earliest memories, the difference in how my parents treated my brother, Ethan, and me was subtle but unmistakable. Ethan, 3 years my senior, was their golden child, the son who would carry on the family name and follow in our father's financially successful footsteps. When Ethan showed an interest in baseball at the age of 8, my father immediately hired a private coach and built a batting cage in our backyard. When I developed a passion for plants and started a small garden at the same age, my mother complained about the dirt I tracked into the house, and my father dismissed it as playing in the dirt. "Ethan has real talent," my father would say after his games, proudly displaying his trophies on the mantelpiece. My science fair ribbons and environmental project certificates remained in desk drawers, only to be taken out when I specifically asked why they weren't on display. By middle school, the pattern was firmly established. When Ethan made the honor roll, our parents took him to a Chicago Bulls game with courtside seats. When I achieved the same academic success, they simply nodded and said, "That's what we expect." The message became increasingly clear. Academic achievement was a baseline expectation, but only certain types of success truly mattered in our family. Christmas and birthdays further highlighted the disparity. On his 16th birthday, Ethan received a brand new sports car with a big red bow on the driveway. On my 16th, I received a used sedan because, as my father explained, you just need something practical to get around. It wasn't about the monetary value, although the difference was significant, but about the thought, excitement, and celebration that accompanied Ethan's gifts, as opposed to the practical, almost obligatory nature of mine. My grandmother, Margaret, was the exception in our family. My father's mother grew up on a small farm in southern Illinois before marrying my grandfather and moving to the suburbs. She understood my fascination with growing plants and nurtured my interest in environmental science. "Not everyone measures success by the dollar sign," she would tell me during our weekend visits to her small house with its beautiful garden. "Some of us measure it by how much good we give back to the earth." Under her guidance, I learned about companion planting, composting, and sustainable farming methods. While my parents viewed these interests as strange and impractical, Grandma Margaret recognized them as a true calling. She gave me rare seeds, special gardening tools, and books on innovative agricultural practices, which I devoured during my summer vacations. "You have a gift, Candace," she would say, her weathered hands guiding mine as we transplanted seedlings. "The world needs people who understand that we cannot continue to take from the earth without giving back." During my senior year of high school, I developed a vertical gardening system for my science project, which received regional recognition. Local news covered the story, and a small magazine about sustainable agriculture interviewed me about the design. My parents attended the awards ceremony out of a sense of duty, but seemed uncomfortable when other parents congratulated them. "It's just a school project," my father said dismissively to a colleague who mentioned seeing me in the newspaper. "Ethan is the one applying to Wharton next year. That's the one with real potential." The summer before my senior year, my grandmother Margaret was diagnosed with aggressive cancer. I spent every possible minute with her, often doing my homework in her hospital room and telling her about my plans to study environmental science in college. "Promise me you'll follow your heart," she said during one of her last sober days, her once strong voice barely above a whisper. "Your father lost his way chasing money. Don't make the same mistake." She died 3 weeks before graduation, leaving me without my only ally in the family. At the funeral, I heard my father tell relatives that I was going through a phase with all this environmental stuff and would eventually move on to something practical. That night, alone in my room, surrounded by college brochures with environmental science programs, I made a silent promise to my grandmother that I would stay true to my passion, even without her support. When the college acceptance letters arrived, the different standards within the family became even more apparent. Ethan was accepted into Northwestern's prestigious business program, and our parents threw a lavish party in his honor, inviting family, friends, and business associates to toast his bright future. My acceptance to the University of Illinois to study environmental science was acknowledged with a brief, "That's nice, dear," over breakfast. When I mentioned the program's excellent reputation and my enthusiasm for their research on sustainable agriculture, my father looked up from his newspaper. "Environmental science? What exactly do you do with that degree? Save rainforests?" he asked with a smile that made it clear he wasn't expecting a serious answer. "Actually, there are growing opportunities in sustainable agriculture, corporate sustainability consulting, and environmental policy," I explained, having researched career paths thoroughly. "The field is expanding as companies recognize the business value of sustainable practices." My father exchanged glances with my mother. "If business is involved, maybe there's still hope for you," he said, returning to his newspaper. The financial disparity in our college experiences was equally telling. My parents paid Ethan's full tuition, bought him a new apartment near campus, and provided generous monthly allowances. For me, they covered tuition and basic dorm expenses, but made it clear that extras would be my responsibility. "Think of it as a learning experience," my mother explained when I asked about the difference. "Ethan is on a serious career path that will require networking and connections. Your interests are more of a personal choice." I found a job at the campus sustainability office for 20 hours a week, balancing my workload with a full-time course load. While Ethan posted updates on social media from fraternity formal events and networking events with financial industry leaders, I divided my time between classes, work, and the university's experimental agricultural plots. Despite the extra workload, I thrived academically. My understanding of sustainable farming systems caught the attention of Professor Helen Williams, a leading researcher in the Department of Urban Agriculture. "Your vertical farming design shows real innovation," she told me after reviewing my freshman project. "Have you considered how this could be scaled up for urban food deserts?" Under her guidance, I expanded my school project into a comprehensive system that maximized growing space while minimizing water consumption. By my junior year, my design was being implemented in a pilot program at a community garden near campus. Although the project received a $15,000 university innovation grant, my excitement was dampened by my family's reaction when I shared the news during a weekend visit home. "That's wonderful, dear," my mother said absently, then immediately turned back to Ethan. "Have you told Candace about your summer internship offer from Goldman Sachs?" The rest of dinner was devoted to Ethan's career prospects, the connections he was making, and the starting salary he could expect after graduation. My grant-funded project, which could help address food insecurity, was not worth more than a passing acknowledgement. As graduation approached, the divergence in our paths became even more pronounced. Ethan completed his business degree and, thanks to our father's connections, landed a position at a prestigious financial firm in Chicago, with a starting salary that made my mother beam with pride when she told her friends. I graduated with honors in environmental science, specializing in sustainable agriculture systems, and minors in business sustainability. The job market in my field was more challenging, especially for roles that matched my specific interests. After several months of searching, I accepted an unpaid internship at Urban Harvest, a nonprofit organization focused on developing community gardens in underserved areas of Chicago. An unpaid internship? At your age? My father's disappointment was palpable when I shared the news over dinner. Ethan was making six figures before he turned 23. It gives me hands-on experience in the exact field I want to work in, I explained. They're implementing innovative farming systems in urban environments. It's cutting-edge work. Cutting-edge gardening, my father muttered. Is this really what we're getting for 4 years of college tuition? My mother put her hand on mine. Honey, have you considered getting an MBA? With your bachelor's degree and some business qualifications, you could find opportunities with better compensation. The suggestion was clear. Give up my passion for something more lucrative. I declined as politely as I could, explaining that I was committed to my current path. The conversation turned to Ethan's recent bonus and his plans to start looking for a condo in an upscale Chicago neighborhood. Instead of continuing to live at home under the weight of their disappointment, I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a less expensive part of town. The commute to my internship was long, and the neighborhood wasn't the best, but the space was mine, free from constant comparisons and thinly veiled suggestions to reconsider my choices. You're making this harder than it needs to be, my mother said when I moved out. We only want what's best for you. I know, Mom, I replied, understanding that in their own way they truly wanted me to be happy. But we don't agree on what best looks like. 3 years after graduation, I had gone from unpaid intern to project manager at Urban Harvest. My salary was modest by Chicago standards, requiring careful budgeting and continued living in my tiny studio apartment, but I found real satisfaction in my work. Under my leadership, we created 7 thriving community gardens in food deserts across the city, teaching residents sustainable growing practices while providing fresh produce in areas with limited access to grocery stores. My innovative vertical farming systems were featured in a sustainability magazine, and I was invited to speak at a regional conference on urban agriculture. These professional achievements brought me personal satisfaction, even as they remained largely unrecognized by my family, who still measured success by promotions and salary increases. Our family dinners became less frequent, but no less tense, with my parents' questions inevitably focusing on my financial situation rather than the impact of my work. Ethan, meanwhile, continued his rapid ascent in the financial world, each promotion and bonus celebrated with expensive gifts and proud announcements to their social circle. The real turning point came during what was supposed to be a happy family event. Ethan had recently proposed to Melissa, the daughter of one of my father's friends from the golf club. She came from a similarly wealthy background, worked in marketing for a luxury brand, and fit perfectly into my parents' vision of the ideal daughter-in-law. My mother immediately began planning an elegant engagement dinner at their home, calling it the social event of the season in their circle. I arrived early to help with the preparations, genuinely happy for my brother despite our different paths in life. Ethan and I had maintained a polite, if somewhat distant, relationship over the years. Although he didn't understand my career choices, he was never openly dismissive like our parents. "Thanks for coming," he said, greeting me with a brief hug. "It means a lot to Melissa. She doesn't have any brothers or sisters, so she's thrilled about her future niece." The dining room was transformed with fresh flowers, fine china, and crystal glasses that only came out for the most special occasions. My mother had hired a caterer, and the menu featured all of Ethan's favorite dishes. When the guests arrived, the house was filled with my parents' friends, Melissa's family, and a few of Ethan's colleagues. I didn't recognize anyone from my own social or professional circle, another subtle reminder of how separate our worlds had become. The dinner proceeded with numerous toasts to the happy couple, stories about Ethan's childhood accomplishments, and warm welcomes to Melissa as the newest addition to the family. My father, clearly moved after several glasses of expensive champagne, stood up for what we all expected to be the final toast. "Family is everything," he began, his voice thick with pride. "Nothing matters more than seeing your children succeed and build their own lives. Ethan has always made us proud, from his first steps to his latest promotion." He raised his glass higher, and now, as he prepares to start his own family, his mother and I want to help lay the foundation. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Melissa, Ethan, we want to give you something to help you get your life together off to a good start." He handed the envelope to Ethan, who opened it and took out a check. His eyes widened slightly before he handed it to Melissa, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her look of pleasant surprise. $230,000, my father announced to the approving murmurs of the guests. "A down payment on a home worthy of the family you will build together." The table erupted in applause as I sat frozen, my glass of champagne halfway to my lips. $230,000, more money than I would earn in several years, given freely, proudly, publicly to my brother, while I struggled to pay the rent each month on a project manager's salary. I forced myself to smile and joined in the applause, fighting the complex emotions rising in my chest. It wasn't about envy or wanting material things for myself. It was about the stark, undeniable evidence of how differently my parents valued our life choices. After dinner, as the guests mingled with after-dinner drinks, I slipped into the kitchen to help the catering staff clean up, needing a moment away from the celebration. As I stacked dessert plates, I heard my parents enter the adjacent dish pantry, unaware of my presence on the other side of the partition. "The perfect evening," my mother said. "Everyone was so impressed with Ethan and Melissa. They make such a beautiful couple." "He did everything right," my father agreed, ice clinking in his glass of scotch. "The right school, the right career, the right girl. We couldn't ask for more." There was a pause, and I should have made my presence known, but something kept me silent, sensing that the conversation was not over. "At least one of our children is not a failure," my father continued, his voice lower but still clear enough. "All that education, and Candace is playing with plants, living paycheck to paycheck. I don't understand where we went wrong with her." The plate in my hand almost slipped as the word loser echoed in my head. After years of rejection and disapproval, hearing my father explicitly confirm what I had always suspected still felt like a knife to the heart. "She's still young," my mother offered half-heartedly. "Maybe she'll come to her senses eventually." I doubt it. She's as stubborn as my mother was. Speaking of which, I still think Mom made a mistake encouraging all that gardening nonsense, putting ideas about saving the world into her head instead of building a proper career. I carefully set down the plate and stepped into the pantry doorway. My parents flinched, exchanging guilty glances that confirmed they hadn't intended for me to hear their assessment. "Candace," my mother began, her social smile quickly replaced by surprise, "we were just going to find you for a champagne toast to Ethan and Melissa's new house." "No, you weren't," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I expected. "You were discussing what a failure I am. Don't worry, I heard you loud and clear." My father straightened up defensively. "You misunderstood. We were just expressing concern about your financial situation." "No, Dad, I understood perfectly. You gave Ethan $230,000 today because he followed your approved life plan. Meanwhile, I'm a failure because I chose a job that matters to me over a higher salary." "That's not fair," my mother interjected. "Ethan made practical choices that provide him with long-term security. We're just worried about your future." "My future is building sustainable food systems for communities that need them. I'm sorry that's not impressive enough for you." My father set down his drink, his expression firm. This childish idealism has gone on long enough, Candace. You have a good education that could be applied to something worthwhile. Instead, you're wasting your potential on glorified gardening projects that will never provide real security. Years of suppressed resentment and anger finally boiled over. Worthy. My work helps people in food deserts access fresh produce. We teach sustainability practices that will matter for generations. Just because it doesn't come with a corner office and stock options doesn't make it worthless. No one is saying your little gardens aren't cute, my mother said in the tone she used when trying to smooth over awkward situations. We just want more for you than struggling to pay rent while doing charity work. It's not charity work, Mom. It's my career, my passion, and it makes a real difference. A real difference to your bank account would make a bigger difference to your life, my father replied. Ethan understood that from the beginning. That's why we can help him with a house now, because he has demonstrated responsibility. So that's it? Financial gifts only for children who follow your approved career paths? My father's patience was visibly wearing thin. Why would we invest in your future when you've chosen to be a failure? The word hung between us, confirming everything I had just heard. My mother's eyes widened slightly at my father's bluntness, but she said nothing to contradict him. I understand, I said, a strange calm replacing the pain as everything crystallized. Thank you for making your position so clear. I walked past them back to the dining room, gathered my purse and jacket, and said a quiet goodbye to Ethan and Melissa, greeting them once more. Neither of my parents followed me or tried to explain or apologize as I left their house. Driving home through curtains of rain that matched my mood, I made a decision that had been forming for years. Until my parents could respect my choices and see value in my work beyond its earning potential, I would stop seeking their approval or subjecting myself to their judgment. That night in my apartment, I deleted their contact information from my phone, unfriended them on social media, and blocked their numbers. The finality of these actions brought both pain and a surprising sense of liberation. For the first time since childhood, I would no longer measure my worth through their disappointed eyes. The first few weeks after cutting off contact with my parents were both liberating and terrifying. Without the constant weight of their disapproval, I felt lighter. But the absence of family, even a family that didn't understand me, left an undeniable void. I threw myself into my work at Urban Harvest, channeling my emotional energy into expanding our community garden program and refining my vertical farming systems. The hydroponic setup I developed as my bachelor's project has evolved significantly over years of testing and iteration. My latest design reduced water consumption by 60% compared to traditional systems, while increasing yields in limited spaces. At Urban Harvest, we implemented these systems in 3 community gardens, but I knew the potential applications were much broader. During a particularly successful harvest day at our newest garden site, I ran into Professor Williams, my mentor from college, who was volunteering with a group of her current students. "Candace, this system is amazing," she said, looking at the vertical towers bursting with leafy greens. "You've solved the water circulation problems we talked about years ago." We spent the day catching up, and I shared my ideas for expanding the system to commercial applications. The technology could transform urban food production, but nonprofit budgets are too limited to scale it properly, I explained. Professor Williams listened intently, then said, "You should meet Daniel Chen. He runs an agricultural technology investment fund focused on sustainability. This is exactly the kind of innovation he's looking for." That introduction changed everything. Daniel visited one of our community gardens the following week, asking detailed questions about water efficiency, nutrient delivery, and scalability. 2 weeks later, he invited me to present a formal business plan to his investment team. "Your technology has commercial potential far beyond community gardens," he explained. "With the right funding, you could develop systems for restaurants, grocery chains, even residential applications." The prospect of expanding my work beyond Urban Harvest was both exciting and daunting. I never saw myself as an entrepreneur, but the opportunity to scale my impact was too appealing to ignore. Over the next month, I worked nights and weekends to develop a comprehensive business plan for what would become Vertical Bloom, a company specializing in the design and implementation of space-efficient growing systems for urban environments. Daniel's fund offered an initial investment of $75,000 in exchange for 20% of the shares, enough to secure a small workshop space and hire a part-time engineer to help refine the technology. I took a leave of absence from Urban Harvest, promising to continue maintaining their gardens while pursuing this new venture. The early days of entrepreneurship were exhausting. I worked 80-hour weeks, dividing my time between technical development, business operations, and desperate attempts to secure our first commercial customers. For the first 3 months, I paid myself nothing, continuing to live in my tiny one-bedroom apartment and stretching my savings to the limit. There were moments of paralyzing doubt, usually at 3 a.m. when I woke up wondering if my father had been right all along. Was I chasing a foolishly idealistic dream while my brother was building a real career? These doubts were especially acute during the holidays when the absence of family, however complicated it was felt most keenly. My first real breakthrough came 4 months later when a regional grocery chain agreed to test my growing system in one of its stores, creating an in-house produce department that would grow lettuce, herbs, and small vegetables right in front of customers. The marketing appeal of ultra-short-distance transportation, combined with significant reductions in water consumption and the elimination of pesticides, created a compelling business case. The installation was featured in local business news, drawing attention to Vertical Bloom and generating inquiries from restaurants and other retailers. 6 months after founding the company, we hired our first full-time employees, a brilliant mechanical engineer named Layla, who helped refine our irrigation system, and a gardener named Ryan, who expanded the variety of plants our system could support. Occasionally, through mutual acquaintances or distant relatives, I heard updates about my family. Ethan and Melissa purchased a luxurious townhouse in Lincoln Park with a generous down payment from my parents. My father received a significant promotion at his firm. My mother presided over another charity ball. These snippets of their lives, which continued without me, brought a mixture of sadness and relief that we were all moving forward on our separate paths. Some well-meaning relatives tried to bridge the gap, inviting me to events where my parents would be, or passing on messages that suggested reconciliation. I remained firm in my boundaries, explaining that I would consider reconnecting when my parents could respect my choices and acknowledge the hurtful ways they had dismissed my work. "They miss you," my Aunt Jennifer told me during one such conversation. "They talk about you more than you think." "They miss who they wanted me to be," I replied, "not who I really am." When Vertical Bloom completed its first year of operation, we reached an unexpected milestone: profitability. It was modest, but our balance sheet was in the black for the first time. We'd installed systems in 8 commercial locations and had a waiting list of potential clients. A well-known restaurant group had signed a contract with us to build a rooftop growing system for their farm-to-table concept, our largest project to date. I moved from my one-bedroom apartment to a small but charming 2-bedroom in a safer neighborhood, allowing myself this one indulgence after years of strict frugality. It was nowhere near the luxurious townhouse Ethan enjoyed, but it was mine, earned through hard work I believed in. With the business stabilizing, I began aggressively saving for a dream that had been forming since my days with Grandma Margaret: owning land where I could test and refine cultivation systems on a larger scale. Not just urban applications, but innovations that could be applied to traditional agriculture to reduce resource use while maintaining productivity. I opened a separate savings account called Farm Fund and directed 30% of my modest salary into it each month, along with any additional consulting fees I earned. The balance grew slowly but steadily as Vertical Bloom continued to expand. By the end of our second year, we had 16 employees and opened a larger manufacturing facility where we made our own growing systems. Coverage in a national magazine about sustainability attracted the attention of larger potential customers, including a hotel chain interested in rooftop gardens and a school district looking to implement educational growing systems. Daniel introduced me to additional investors interested in our Series A funding round, allowing us to further expand operations and develop new product lines. My initial 20% stake in the company was diluted by the new investments, but the overall valuation had increased so significantly that my net worth on paper was now approaching 7 figures, a fact that would have shocked my parents if they had known. Throughout all of this, I maintained the boundaries I had set. When the wedding invitation for my cousin's ceremony arrived, where my parents would be, I sent a generous gift but declined to attend. When Ethan left a voicemail on my work phone, the only number he could reach me at, about a family health scare involving our mother, which turned out to be minor, I responded with a brief email expressing concern but maintaining distance. As the second anniversary of my decision to break off contact approached, the farm fund had grown to a respectable initial contribution for the type of property I had in mind. I began working with a real estate agent specializing in agricultural properties within commuting distance of Chicago, looking for the right combination of good soil, existing structures, and proximity to the city where our business operations would remain. After viewing a dozen properties that weren't quite right, the agent called with excitement about a new listing. 40 acres just came on the market in McHenry County. It's an old farmhouse that needs work, a large barn in decent condition, and perfect southern exposure for your test fields. The owner is motivated to sell quickly. The property was at the upper limit of my budget, requiring every cent of my savings, plus a mortgage that would stretch my finances. But the moment I drove up the long gravel driveway, I knew this was what I had been working toward. The 1920s farmhouse had good bones, despite its outdated interior. The barn would provide enough space for equipment and initial growing trials, and the gently rolling fields offered ideal conditions for parallel testing of different farming methods. I made an offer that same day, and after brief negotiations, it was accepted. 60 days later, I became the owner of 40 acres of opportunity, the physical embodiment of the path I had chosen, despite my family's disapproval. On the day I received the keys, I stood in the center of what would become my first test field, the afternoon sun warming my face as I surveyed the land that was now mine. At that moment, I felt Grandma Margaret's presence strongly, as if she were standing next to me, nodding her approval of the seeds I was about to plant, both literally and figuratively. 2 years after breaking contact with my parents, Vertical Bloom had become a respected name in sustainable agriculture technology. We employed 15 full-time staff, had systems installed in 3 states, and were in discussions with an international hotel chain about implementing our growing systems in their properties around the world. The company's success provided a financial stability I hadn't imagined possible at the beginning, but my greatest joy came from the farm property I now called home. Over the course of 6 months of evenings and weekends, with the help of friends and colleagues, I renovated the farmhouse into a comfortable living space that preserved its historic character while adding modern conveniences. The barn was converted into a combination workshop and research space, where we tested new prototypes of cultivation systems before their commercial implementation. The first 5 acres of fields were now dedicated to comparative growing trials, with traditional methods alongside various sustainable approaches, carefully documented to quantify differences in resource use and yields. Moving Day was a collaborative effort, with my close friend Sophie organizing a group of friends to help transport furniture and boxes from my apartment to the farmhouse. By sunset, we were sitting on the wide front porch with pizza and beer, celebrating this milestone, which represented not only a change of address, but the culmination of a vision that had sustained me through years of rejection and doubt. To Candace, Sophie said, raising her bottle, who knew exactly what she wanted and never gave up, even when the people who should have supported her most couldn't see her vision. The words brought unexpected tears to my eyes, a recognition of both my accomplishments and the absence of a family that still hurt, despite my professional satisfaction. These friends had become my chosen family, supporting my dreams without questioning their value. But the empty space where my biological family should have been remained a quiet sadness that I had learned to live with. The universe has a strange sense of timing and irony. The next day, as I was unpacking boxes in my new kitchen, I heard a vehicle approaching down the long driveway. Assuming it was one of my friends who had helped with the move, returning with a forgotten item, I stepped out onto the porch, only to freeze at the sight of a familiar luxury SUV that I hadn't seen in 2 years. Ethan's vehicle slowed to a stop, and I watched as my brother and his wife, Melissa, looked through the windshield at me, standing on the porch of the renovated farmhouse. Their expressions changed from confusion to surprise as they took in the scale of the property stretching out behind me. Ethan rolled down the window. "Candace, is that you?" "Ethan," I acknowledged, my voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." He got out of the car slowly, looking around the property with obvious amazement. "We were driving back from Melissa's parents' house in Wisconsin and took the scenic route. I saw the vertical bloom sign at the end of the road and couldn't believe it. Is this yours?" "Yes," I said simply, "all 40 acres." Melissa joined him, elegant as always in designer casual wear that looked out of place on the gravel road. "It's beautiful," she offered, sounding sincere despite her obvious surprise. "The house is charming." An awkward silence fell between us. 2 years of no contact had created a gap wider than the physical distance that separated us on the road. Finally, I sighed and pointed to the house. "Would you like to come in? I just made coffee." They followed me inside, their designer shoes looking out of place on the restored hardwood floor. I gave them a quick tour of the first floor, explaining the renovations we had completed and our plans for the rest of the space. "Did you do all this yourself?" Ethan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice as he examined the exposed beam ceiling we had uncovered during the renovation. "With the help of friends. The bones were good. They just needed updating." We settled down at the kitchen table with coffee, the conversation tense and cautious. Ethan explained that they had been visiting Melissa's parents for the weekend and had taken an alternate route back to the city to avoid construction on the highway. "I almost didn't turn when I saw the sign," he admitted. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I'm not sure either," I replied honestly. "But you're here now." Ethan looked down at his coffee cup. "I thought about reaching out so many times after what happened. After the things Dad said, I had something to say." "Yes, you did," I agreed without offense. "But we all made our choices." "I didn't know you started your own company," he continued, "or that it was doing well enough for that." He pointed to the house and property visible through the windows. "There's a lot you don't know about my life, Ethan. That was part of the problem." He nodded slowly. "I know that now. In fact, I've been following your company's progress for the past year. One of our clients invests in ag tech startups, and your name came up during a meeting. I couldn't believe it was my little sister they were talking about as this innovative CEO. The revelation surprised me. You never got in touch." I didn't know what to say. After standing by while Dad called you a failure, then taking their money for our house, I was ashamed. "Candace," Melissa touched his hand supportively, "Ethan has been questioning a lot of things lately, his career path, the choices we've made." Ethan's expression confirmed her words. "I'm good at my job, but I don't love it the way you clearly love what you do. Every morning I put on a suit and play the role my dad prepared me for, and lately I've been asking myself if I'm living his dream instead of my own." The confession was so unexpected that I didn't immediately know how to respond. Ethan always seemed perfectly content with his role as the golden child, accepting the expectations and rewards that came with following his parents' approved life plan. "What would you do instead?" I finally asked. He shrugged, suddenly looking younger and less confident than the assured financial manager I was used to seeing. "I don't know yet. But watching you build something meaningful on your own terms has made me think." After we finished our coffee, I offered to show them the rest of the property. We walked through the converted barn with its experimental growing systems to the test fields where different farming methods were compared side by side, and finally to the small orchard I was restoring with heirloom apple varieties. Throughout the tour, Ethan asked increasingly thoughtful questions about the business, the technology, and my vision for the future, not the dismissive inquiries our father would have made about revenue and return on investment, but a genuine interest in the work itself and its potential impact. When we returned to the house, Ethan paused at the edge of the garden, looking back at the property. "Dad was wrong about you, Candace. So wrong." He turned to face me directly. "You're not a failure. You've built something amazing here." The words I had longed to hear from my father, coming instead from my brother, brought an unexpected wave of emotion. Before I could respond, Ethan pulled out his phone. "Dad needs to see this. He needs to understand what you've accomplished." A wave of panic washed over me. "Ethan, I don't think that's a good idea. The boundaries I set 2 years ago are still in place." But Ethan was already dialing, putting the phone on speaker as he called. Our father answered on the third ring, his familiar voice sending a jolt through me after so long. "Ethan, is everything okay? Aren't you driving back from Melissa's parents' house?" "Dad, you need to see what Candace has built." Ethan's voice was urgent, almost angry. "She owns 40 acres in McHenry County. She's built a successful company. She has employees and clients in several states. Everything you said about her was wrong." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. "Are you with Candace?" Our father's voice lost its usual confidence. "Yes. We happened to drive past her property. Dad, you and Mom have to come see this. You have to understand what she's doing." Another long pause. "Is she there? Can I talk to her?" Ethan looked at me questioningly. After a moment's hesitation, I shook my head. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not now, not like this. "She's not available right now," Ethan said, respecting my decision. "But Dad, I'm serious. The things you said that night, you were wrong. Candace isn't wasting her potential or messing around with plants. She's building something important." "I see," our father said, his tone unreadable. "Well, thanks for letting me know, son. Your mother and I will discuss it." After the call ended, Ethan turned to me apologetically. "I'm sorry if that was over the top. I just couldn't let him continue to think you were struggling or failing when the reality is so different." I wasn't sure how to feel about Ethan's intervention. Part of me appreciated his attempt to correct our father's misconceptions, while another part felt protective of the life I had built without their recognition or involvement. "It's done now," I said finally. "But Ethan, I need you to understand something. I didn't build this to prove Dad wrong or to show that I could be successful on his terms. I built this because this work matters to me, because I believe in what we're creating." "I know," he said quietly. "That's what makes it even more impressive. You did it for the right reasons." As they were getting ready to leave, Ethan hesitantly asked if we could stay in touch. "I missed my sister," he confessed, "and I'd like to know more about your work if you're willing to share." The request was sincere, and despite the complicated feelings his visit stirred up, I found myself nodding. "I'd like that. But Ethan, I need you to respect my boundaries with Mom and Dad. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be separate from them, for now." "I understand," he assured me. "It's between us." As I watched their car disappear down the road, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The unexpected reconnection with Ethan had opened a door I thought would remain closed, while reminding me of everything I had achieved on my own terms, without the approval or support I had once craved from my parents. Whether they would ever come to understand or appreciate my choices remained to be seen. But standing on the porch of my farmhouse, looking at the land that represented my vision becoming reality, I knew with certainty that I had chosen the right path for myself, regardless of their judgment. The week after Ethan's surprise visit passed in a whirlwind of normal activities. I had several meetings with potential clients, oversaw a new installation at the central restaurant, and continued the endless process of unpacking boxes at the farmhouse. If I checked my phone more often than usual, waiting for perhaps another call from Ethan or even my parents, I tried not to acknowledge it consciously. 7 days after Ethan's visit, I returned home from the office to find a black Mercedes sedan parked on my driveway. My stomach immediately tightened at the recognition of my father's car. After 2 years of complete estrangement, both my brother and my parents had appeared on my doorstep within a week. I sat in my truck for several minutes, gathering my composure and considering my options. I could drive away, avoiding confrontation entirely. I could have called and asked them to leave, or I could have met whatever conversation they had come to have, on my turf and on my terms. Taking a deep breath, I chose the third option, getting out of my truck and walking toward the house, where my parents stood awkwardly on the porch. My mother looked older than I remembered, her carefully maintained appearance showing subtle signs of the passage of time. My father stood stiffly beside her, his expression unreadable behind his usual mask of professional composure. "Candace," my mother said as I approached, her voice trembling slightly, "you look well." "What are you doing here?" I asked bluntly, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. My father cleared his throat. "Ethan told us about his visit, about your property and business. We wanted to see for ourselves." 2 years of silence, and now you just show up without warning? The pain I thought I had worked through suddenly resurfaced. "We should have called first," my mother admitted. "We weren't sure you'd agree to see us." She was right. If they had called ahead, I probably would have refused the visit, not feeling ready for any judgment or conditional approval they might offer. "Well, you're here now," I said, repeating the words I had used with Ethan. I unlocked the door but didn't immediately invite them inside. "Why did you come?" My father pointed to the property surrounding us. "To see what you've built. Ethan was quite insistent that we had the wrong impression of your situation." The cautious wording was typical of my father, avoiding any direct admission of error or apology. Still, the fact that they had driven here was a step I hadn't expected them to take. "Okay," I said, pushing open the door. "I'll show you, and then we can talk." Unlike Ethan's visit, which carried the awkwardness of estrangement, but not the weight of direct offense, showing my parents my home and work felt both vindicating and vulnerable. As we moved through the house, my mother commented on the charm of the original features we had preserved and the tasteful updates, her interior designer's eye-noticing details most would have missed. "You've done a wonderful job with the renovation," she said, sounding sincere in her praise. "The space has so much character." My father remained largely silent until we reached my home office, where vertical bloom press coverage lined one wall alongside technical drawings of our growing systems. "Your brother mentioned that you have systems in 3 states," he said, studying the materials. "How many employees does your company have now?" 15 full-time, plus contractors for installations, I replied, watching his expression as he processed the information. In the barn workshop, I explained our latest innovations in water recovery and nutrient delivery, the technical aspects of the business that translated into measurable efficiency improvements for our customers. For the first time, I saw my father's professional interest engage as he asked questions about scalability and patent protection. As we walked through the test fields, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the carefully marked sections, my mother asked about the different crops we were growing and why certain methods were placed side by side. We compare water consumption, yield, and nutrient density between traditional methods and our modified approaches, I explained, pointing to irrigation systems and monitoring stations. The data helps us improve our commercial systems and provides case studies for potential customers. By the time we finished the tour, the tension had shifted from hostile to simply awkward. Back at the house, I offered coffee, more out of ingrained politeness than genuine hospitality, and we settled at the kitchen table for a conversation I had both anticipated and dreaded for 2 years. "Your operation is impressive, Candace," my father began, his tone suggesting he was evaluating a business presentation rather than reconnecting with his daughter. Clearly more substantial than we realized. "That's because you never asked," I replied flatly. "You decided my work wasn't valuable because it didn't fit your definition of success." My mother placed her hand on my father's arm, a gesture I recognized from countless family discussions where she tried to soften his approach. "We were concerned about your financial security," she offered. "We didn't understand that you were building something with such potential." The careful choice of potential rather than recognition of actual achievement was not lost on me. Even now, they measured my work by its financial prospects rather than its intrinsic value or my passion for it. My work had value even when I was earning $28,000 a year at Urban Harvest, I said firmly. The impact of what I do doesn't begin and end with a balance sheet. My father shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we focus too much on conventional measures of success," he conceded, the closest thing to an admission of error I've ever heard from him. "Your brother was pretty upset with us after he saw your operation. He said we were unfair in our assessment." "You called me a failure," I said quietly. "Those were his exact words, Dad, and we didn't correct him. That was wrong." "Yes, it was wrong," I agreed, meeting her gaze. "It was the culmination of years of rejection and disappointment because I chose a different path than the one you prescribed." My father's jaw tightened. His instinct to defend himself was clearly at war with whatever purpose had brought them here. "We wanted security for you," he finally said. "The kind of security we gave Ethan with the down payment on his house." The mention of the $230,000 gift that had been the last straw hung between us. I took a deep breath, deciding to address it directly. "That night made it abundantly clear where I stood in the family hierarchy," I said. "It wasn't just the difference in money, although that disparity was certainly stark. It was hearing myself described as a failure after years of working toward goals you never bothered to understand or appreciate." "We should have supported your choices," my mother said, surprising me with the directness of her admission. "Even if we didn't fully understand them, that's what parents are supposed to do." My father looked out the window at the fields where the evidence of my vision was taking physical form. "I built my career in a world where success had clear metrics," he said slowly. "Profit margins, asset growth, measurable return on investment. I applied those same metrics to my children's choices, not considering that different industries operate on different measures of value. It was perhaps the greatest insight he had ever offered into his perspective, an acknowledgement, albeit limited, that his framework was not the only valid one. Your work here," he pointed to the property visible through the windows, "has its own metrics, improving sustainability, conserving resources, innovation that solves real problems." He met me directly. "I didn't have the right vocabulary to appreciate what you were building, so I dismissed it instead. That was short-sighted on my part." Coming from my father, this qualified admission was significant, perhaps the closest to an apology his pride would allow. My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "We missed you, Candace. Hearing from Ethan that you built all this while we were completely absent from your life made us realize how much we lost because of our own narrow thinking." The sincerity in her voice penetrated the protective walls I had built. "I missed you too," I confessed, "but I couldn't continue to subject myself to constant disapproval and rejection. It was destroying me. And the fact that we drove you to completely break off contact should tell us something about how badly we failed as parents," my mother said, a bluntness unusual for her conflict-averse nature. My father cleared his throat. "If we tried again, what would that look like, from your perspective?" The question surprised me. I had expected perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement of my accomplishments, but not this tentative step toward reconciliation. It would require genuine respect for my choices and my work, I said after a moment's thought, not just because the business is successful now, but because the work itself has value. And it would mean acknowledging the pain caused by years of comparing me unfavorably to Ethan and dismissing my path as worthless. My father nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. As they prepared to leave an hour later, our conversation having covered painful ground but not reached a final resolution, my father paused at the door. "Your grandmother would be proud of what you've built here," he said unexpectedly. "She always said you had a special connection to the land. I should have listened to her more carefully." The mention of Grandma Margaret and the acknowledgement of her influence, which he had previously dismissed, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After they left, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky above my fields, processing the unexpected visit and its aftermath. The relationship remained fragile, the pain not fully healed, but a door had been opened that I had believed was permanently closed. Ethan called that evening to check in, having heard from our parents about their visit. "They were pretty quiet after," he reported, "but Dad mentioned that your business model was more complex than expected, which, coming from him, is practically effusive praise." I laughed despite myself. "Small steps, I guess." "Are you okay with them getting in touch?" he asked. "I feel responsible because I pushed for it by calling Dad from your place." "I'm working on it," I replied honestly. "Part of me is glad they made the effort to see what I've built. Another part is cautious about getting hurt again if their newfound respect is conditional on my financial success rather than the value of the work itself." "That's fair," Ethan acknowledged. "For what it's worth, I think seeing your place in person really made an impact on them. It's one thing to hear about your company. It's another to see the physical embodiment of your vision. It made it real in a way that words couldn't." When we ended the call, I realized that while the visit didn't provide a neat resolution to the television family drama, it had started a process of reevaluation and potential healing that would unfold in its own time, with boundaries that I now felt empowered to uphold. 6 months after my parents' unexpected visit to the farm, the landscape, both literal and emotional, had changed significantly. Spring had transformed the test fields into a vibrant tapestry of green, and the experimental crops were thriving under the various cultivation methods we were evaluating. The farm became not only my home, but a living laboratory where Vertical Bloom tested innovations before implementing them for clients. My relationship with my family similarly began to take on a new form, a cautious growth replacing the barren silence of the previous 2 years. Ethan and I resumed regular contact, with him visiting the farm every month, genuinely interested in the business and sometimes contributing his financial expertise to growth strategies. "You know," he said during one such visit, helping me install monitoring equipment in a new test plot, "I never expected to enjoy getting my hands dirty like this. Dad would have a heart attack seeing his investment banker's son doing physical labor on a farm." The comment revealed how much Ethan himself had changed, finding satisfaction in activities beyond the narrow definition of success we were raised with. He recently reduced his working hours to 4 days a week, using the extra time to explore interests long suppressed by professional expectations. My relationship with my parents evolved more slowly, with cautious steps on both sides. We established a monthly phone call, somewhat formal at first, but gradually becoming more natural. My mother visited the farm twice more, each time bringing something for the house, a peaceful offer in the language of homemaking, which she understood best. My father remained more reserved, but made an effort in his own way, sending articles about agricultural technology or sustainability initiatives he encountered in his work. It was his way of showing that he was now paying attention to an industry he had previously dismissed, trying to understand my world on his own terms. The most significant test of our fragile new dynamic came with an invitation to dinner at the farmhouse. After much deliberation, I decided it was time to try a family gathering on my turf, where I felt most safe and confident. The evening arrived with perfect early fall weather, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of ripening apples from the orchard. I prepared a meal using produce from the farm, a tangible demonstration of the abundance that could be created through sustainable methods. Ethan and Melissa arrived first, bringing wine and a light familiarity with the space from their regular visits. My parents followed shortly after, my mother carrying a photo album I didn't recognize. The conversation over dinner remained mostly safe, focusing on Ethan and Melissa's recent vacation and updates on distant family members. When we moved to the porch for coffee after the meal, my mother handed me the album she had brought. "I was looking through old photos," she explained. "I realized we have so few of your accomplishments compared to Ethan's, all those science fairs and projects we didn't fully document." The album contained photos she had managed to find of my early environmental projects, school awards, and even recent press clippings about vertical bloom, which she had collected without my knowledge. The effort to acknowledge my journey, albeit belated, was touching in its sincerity. "Thank you," I said simply, acknowledging the gesture for what it was, an attempt to rewrite the narrative of indifference that had characterized their response to my accomplishments. As the evening progressed, my father cleared his throat in a deliberate manner, signaling that he had something important to discuss. "Candace, your mother and I have been discussing something we'd like to propose." I tensed slightly, unsure of what was coming. "We've been thinking about the imbalance in how we've supported you and Ethan financially," he continued cautiously. "The down payment on the house was the breaking point between us." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still carrying some guilt about his role in the family rift. "We would like to make an equivalent gift to you," my father said. $230,000, to use as you see fit, for your business, for the farm, or for yourself personally." The offer hung in the air between us. 2 years ago, such financial recognition would have meant everything. Now, having built my success without their support, I found that it carried a different meaning. "I appreciate the gesture," I said after a moment's thought, "but I don't need the money personally, and the business is doing well on its own merits." My father's expression fell slightly. The rejection of his attempt at equality clearly disappointed him. "However," I continued, "I have a suggestion for how that money could make a difference in a way that would be meaningful to me." I explained my idea for a scholarship fund for young women pursuing degrees in sustainable agriculture and environmental sciences, especially those facing family pressure to choose more traditional paths. "We could establish it in Grandma Margaret's name," I suggested, supporting students who, like me, see value in work that others may not immediately understand. The mention of my grandmother, whose early encouragement was so crucial to my path, clearly moved my father. "She would have loved that," he said quietly. "She always believed that education should open doors, not close them." Over the next few weeks, we worked together to establish the Margaret Miller Scholarship for Innovation in Sustainable Agriculture. The process of collaborating on something meaningful began to heal wounds that simple financial compensation could not address, creating a shared purpose that acknowledged both past hurt and the possibility of a different future. As the 1-year anniversary of our confrontation approached, I invited my family to a small gathering at the farm to celebrate both the launch of the scholarship fund and the demonstration field, which was now fully operational, providing data for our next generation of commercial systems. Standing together at the edge of the field, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and gold, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with winning approval and everything to do with standing firmly in my own truth while allowing space for the relationship to evolve. "I never imagined this," my father said, pointing to the thriving crops and monitoring stations. "When you first talked about environmental science, I imagined something abstract, theoretical. Not this practical innovation with tangible results." "That was part of the problem," I replied without bitterness. "You couldn't appreciate what you couldn't imagine." He nodded thoughtfully. "I measured success by standards I understood. That limited my ability to see other forms of meaningful achievement. My mother slipped her hand under mine, a gesture of affection that had seemed impossible during years of tense disapproval. "We're learning," she said simply. And they were learning, in their own way and at their own pace. The relationship would never be easy. Years of rejection and pain had left marks that time could soften, but never completely erase. Yet there was genuine growth on all sides, a willingness to expand definitions and expectations that created space for authentic connection. Ethan perhaps changed most dramatically, questioning the path he had so obediently followed and finding satisfaction in activities and interests outside the narrow band of acceptable pursuits we were raised with. He recently joined the board of a nonprofit focused on urban food security, bringing his financial expertise to an organization aligned with the values he discovered through reconnecting with me. "You know what's ironic?" he said as we walked back to the house together. "Following the approved family plan was supposed to bring security and happiness, but I've never felt more satisfied than since I started questioning it. Watching you build this life on your own terms has given me permission to examine my own choices." My business continued to thrive, expanding into new markets and developing increasingly sophisticated cultivation systems for different environments. The demonstration farm became a destination for agricultural students and sustainability professionals, a living showcase of innovation that attracted visitors from across the country. More significant than professional success, however, was the inner peace that came from living authentically. The recognition I had once desperately sought from my family became secondary to the satisfaction of creating work that aligned with my values. When their respect finally came, it was welcome, but no longer necessary for my sense of worth. Standing in my fields as the last light of day painted the sky, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of rejection was real and deep, but it was also the catalyst for building a life entirely on my own terms, unrestricted by others' limited vision of what success should look like. Some wounds may never fully heal, some patterns of family interaction may always require conscious effort to navigate, but the authentic path I chose ultimately created the opportunity for more genuine connections, based on who we truly were rather than who we were supposed to be. The biggest lesson was not that I proved my parents wrong or that success validated my choices. It was that defining success on my own terms, standing firm in my truth, even when it meant walking alone for a while, created a foundation for a life of integrity and purpose that no external recognition could ever provide. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own authentic path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the ones we set with the people we love most, but standing in our truth can lead to unexpected growth for everyone involved. If this story resonated with you, please click like, subscribe for more real-life journeys, and share with someone who may need encouragement to follow their own path, even when it's not the one others have mapped out for them. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, success is not measured by the approval of others, but by the alignment between your actions and your deepest values.